A waitress walked into a luxury restaurant, and what happened next left everyone speechless. Watch till the end, subscribe, and drop your city in the comments. Amelia Johnson adjusted the stiff black vest over her crisp white shirt and took a long breath in front of the bathroom mirror. The reflection staring back at her was not the image of the accomplished businesswoman who had just signed the documents to acquire one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. Tonight, she wasn't the owner, the investor, or the respected entrepreneur who had built her career brick by brick. Tonight she was Pilar, a new waitress on her very first day of work. The decision had been calculated. Amelia had inherited not just the restaurant's name and property, but also its reputation. On paper, the place gleamed with excellence, but Amelia had learned over the years that the Polish luxury often hid cracks in its foundation. Staff culture, treatment of employees, and the way management handled people were what truly defined a business. Numbers could lie. Human behavior never did. And Amelia wanted the truth. She had come in without announcement, registering under a false name, blending into the team. Nobody knew who she was except for the silent lawyer who had helped her draw up the acquisition papers. To the staff and administrators, she was just another candidate, desperate for work in a city where restaurants turned over employees like revolving doors. Stepping out of the bathroom, Amelia tied the apron around her waist and walked into the bustling dining area. The air was thick with the mingled scents of garlic, butter, and expensive wine. Waiters glided between tables with rehearsed precision, their smiles practiced and polite. Chandeliers cast golden light across polished silverware, and conversations hummed with the soft arrogance of wealthy guests. Almost instantly, she felt the change in the atmosphere when the other servers noticed her. Their glances flicked over her, quick, assessing, dismissive. A new face meant more hands to share tips with, more competition, more work. But Amelia knew it wasn't just that. She had seen this look before. The subtle tightening of jaws, the raised brows, the almost imperceptible smirk. A black woman stepping into their perfect, curated world didn't fit. Pilar, right? A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to see him, the restaurant administrator, tall, lean, with slick blonde hair and a suit pressed so sharply it could cut glass. His smile carried no warmth. "Yes, sir," Amelia replied, steadying her voice into something polite and neutral. "Follow me," he said curtly. He walked her through the dining room as though she were invisible, not bothering to introduce her to the others. His tone was clipped, his pace fast, forcing her to keep up. They passed tables where guests laughed over champagne flutes, oblivious to the small drama unfolding within their servers' ranks. At the side station, he finally stopped and turned to her. "Here's the deal. You're new, so don't expect anyone to babysit you. Do your job, keep out of the way, and maybe you'll last longer than a week." His eyes narrowed slightly, scanning her up and down. "Though, honestly, I don't see you fitting in here." The words carried a weight Amelia had anticipated but still stung to hear spoken aloud. She kept her expression calm, her hands folded in front of her. "Yes, sir," she said evenly. He smirked. "Good. At least you know how to say sir. Let's hope you can carry a tray without spilling." He walked away, leaving her standing in the corner, and Amelia felt the cold sting of eyes on her. A couple of waitresses exchanged whispers, one of them suppressing a laugh. Another rolled her eyes and turned back to polishing glasses. The night pressed on. Orders came in, plates went out, and Amelia worked silently, moving from table to table with precision she had learned from years of fine dining as a guest but never revealed until now as a worker. She balanced trays, remembered orders, smiled when she had to, and endured the occasional raised eyebrow from a customer surprised to see her serving them instead of someone else. In the kitchen, she caught snippets of conversation. Where did they even find her? She's too slow. Bet she won't last 2 days." It wasn't just idle chatter. It was a climate, a culture, a quiet wall built against her. By the middle of the evening, Amelia's feet ached, her back stiffened, but she kept her head high. She noticed everything: the way the administrator barked at one of the younger waiters for forgetting bread service, then turned around to lavish praise on another who made the same mistake but had the right look. She watched as colleagues ignored her when she asked for help, carrying a heavy tray, forcing her to manage alone. She listened as the administrator scolded her for being in the way when she was simply waiting at the service station, exactly where she was supposed to be. Each moment carved into her the truth of what she had feared. Behind the polished menus and the glowing reviews, this restaurant had a rotten core. As the night wound down, the administrator approached her again. His expression was unreadable, but his words were sharp. "Not terrible for your first night, but don't think you're special. You'll need to prove yourself, every single shift. Otherwise, don't bother showing up tomorrow." Amelia met his gaze. Behind her polite nod, her mind was already racing. This was only the beginning. She had seen enough to know that something was wrong, but she needed more. More proof, more experiences, more cracks revealed. "Yes, sir," she replied again, her tone steady, her face unreadable. But as she walked back into the locker room at the end of the night, she allowed herself a small, private smile. This was exactly why she had come incognito, and this was only the first step. The second day began with a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Amelia stood at the employee entrance, adjusting her apron, and felt the air grow heavier the moment she stepped inside. It wasn't a simple matter of being new. She had been new before, in other companies and other circles, and she knew the subtle difference between the cautious distance people gave to a stranger and the deliberate wall of rejection they built when they didn't want you there at all. This was the latter. "Pilar!" The administrator's voice cut through the clatter of plates and chatter of staff. He always said her assumed name with a sharp snap, as if spitting out a bitter taste. "You're late." She wasn't. She had arrived 15 minutes early, like the handbook instructed. But Amelia knew better than to argue. She only bowed her head slightly and murmured, "Yes, sir." His smirk widened. "At least you know how to take responsibility. Try not to embarrass the restaurant today. We have important guests tonight." The important guests turned out to be a corporate group seated at the central table, their suits immaculate, their laughter loud. Amelia was assigned to their section, which immediately felt like a setup. She carried water pitchers and glasses to the table, her movements careful, measured. But as she reached across to place a glass, one of the men chuckled and muttered, just loud enough for his colleagues to hear, "Didn't know they hired housemaids here." The table erupted in quiet laughter. Amelia's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to keep moving. She had trained her entire life to keep her dignity intact in the face of insult. She smiled tightly, poured the water, and moved on, her back straight. From across the room, she saw the administrator watching. His grin spread wide, as if her discomfort was entertainment. The rest of the evening unfolded like a constant storm. Every move she made was scrutinized. When she carried 2 trays at once and delivered them without error, he told her she was too slow. When she managed 3 tables simultaneously, ensuring every guest had what they wanted, he accused her of hovering and making people uncomfortable. At one point, she returned from the kitchen carrying a tray of desserts. The path between tables was narrow, and another waiter brushed past her, bumping her elbow. One of the plates slipped, tilting dangerously before she righted it. The guests at the nearest table gasped, but nothing spilled. Amelia exhaled in relief until the administrator appeared at her side. "Clumsy," he said, coldly, loud enough for the guests to hear. If you can't handle a simple tray, maybe this job isn't for you." Heat flushed across her face. She bowed her head slightly, murmured an apology, and kept moving. But inside, her anger simmered. She had balanced the tray perfectly. It hadn't been her mistake. He wanted her to fail. The whispers from colleagues grew bolder, no longer confined to the kitchen. "She's a liability. Bet he fires her by the end of the week. She doesn't belong here anyway." Amelia absorbed it all silently. She had to. To reveal herself now would be premature. She needed to see the truth of this place laid bare. No excuses, no doubts. By the end of the week, the humiliation had become routine. The administrator called her out for being too slow, too stiff, too unfriendly, too eager. It didn't matter what she did. There was always something to criticize, and always it was in front of others. He wanted to make a spectacle of her mistakes, to turn her into an example of what not to be. One night, when the restaurant was buzzing with guests, Amelia carried a heavy tray of wine, glasses. The administrator intercepted her halfway to the table. "Stop." He lifted one of the glasses from the tray and held it up to the light. "Smudges. Do you know how much a guest pays for a glass of this vintage, and you think they want fingerprints all over it?" She blinked, stunned. She had polished every glass meticulously. She could see her reflection in the clear surface of the crystal. There was no smudge, yet he tilted it theatrically, clucking his tongue, while a group of diners turned their heads to watch. "Pathetic," he said finally, slamming the glass back onto the tray so hard it rattled. "You'll redo the entire set." Her heart pounded in her chest. Every fiber of her body wanted to fight back, to tell him exactly what she thought. But she held it in. She lowered her eyes, gave a small nod, and walked away. Tray balanced perfectly. The laughter followed her into the kitchen. The breaking point came a few days later. A table of tourists had finished their meal, and Amelia approached with the check presenter. She placed it gently on the table, bowing her head slightly as she had seen the other servers do. The guests smiled politely, one of them thanking her. But before she could step away, the administrator swooped in. "Not like that," he barked, snatching the presenter from the table. "Do you even know what grace is? This isn't some roadside diner. This is a 5-star establishment. You can't just dump the bill like it's fast food." The guests looked startled, uncomfortable. Amelia's throat tightened. She wanted to say she had done nothing wrong, that she had mirrored exactly what she had seen others do. But the administrator's voice grew louder, meant for the entire room to hear. "Honestly, I don't know why they keep hiring people like you," he sneered. "You lower the standard of this place." Silence spread like wildfire across the tables nearby. Guests shifted awkwardly, some staring at their plates, others glancing up with a mixture of pity and unease. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "People like you." Amelia stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides, her teeth gritted behind a forced, neutral expression. She swallowed the anger that burned in her throat and nodded once. "Yes, sir," she whispered. He smirked, satisfied, and walked away. As she cleared the table, she could feel the eyes of the guests still on her. Some looked guilty, others embarrassed. No one spoke, no one intervened. By the time she returned to the kitchen, Amelia's heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. This was more than simple criticism. It was targeted, deliberate, cruel. And it was escalating. She wiped her hands on her apron and steadied her breath. If the administrator wanted to break her, he had chosen the wrong woman. She had endured worse and risen higher, and when the time came, she would reveal everything. But for now, she stayed silent. She stayed Pilar. She stayed the outsider, enduring humiliation, waiting for the moment when the truth would turn the tables on all of them. The restaurant was alive that night, pulsing with energy. Every table was filled, every chandelier glowed with golden light, and the clatter of silverware mingled with the hum of laughter and conversation. It was one of those evenings when the establishment displayed its most dazzling face to the city, the kind of night critics wrote about when wealthy guests lined up reservations months in advance. Amelia, still cloaked in her disguise as Pilar, felt a familiar ache in her shoulders as she carried trays, poured wine, and offered smiles that felt heavier with each passing hour. She had already grown accustomed to whispers, smirks, and the biting words of the administrator. But something was different tonight. His eyes lingered longer, his grin wider, his tone sharper. From the very start of her shift, he had found excuses to call her out. "You're blocking the walkway, Pilar. You're holding that tray wrong. Guests don't like being served by someone so stiff." Each comment was laced with disdain, and each one was deliberately delivered in earshot of others. But as the evening progressed, Amelia began to sense that he was building toward something, a storm gathering force. His laughter when she passed, the whispers he exchanged with two waiters who quickly stifled their grins, the way he kept glancing toward her as if waiting for the right moment. That moment arrived when the dining room reached its peak of noise and movement. The corporate guests in the center were on their third bottle of wine, their laughter booming across the room. Couples filled the corners, clinking glasses in soft candlelight, and then, in the middle of it all, the administrator raised his voice. "Pilar, over here." She walked over, her steps steady, her tray balanced. He stood with the flour sack in his hands. Why flour in the dining room, Amelia didn't know. It should have been in the kitchen, but his smirk told her everything. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. The room quieted, curiosity rippling across the guests as they turned their heads. Amelia felt the heat of dozens of eyes burning into her. "You think you're one of us?" the administrator said loudly, holding the sack aloft like a prop in a cruel performance. "You think you belong here, in a place like this?" The silence was broken by a few nervous chuckles, then whispers. Before Amelia could move, before she could even open her mouth, the administrator tilted the sack and poured. White powder cascaded over her head, spilling onto her hair, her shoulders, her uniform. It clung to her eyelashes, coated her skin, clouded the air around her. A collective gasp surged through the room, followed by laughter, soft at first, then louder, rolling like a cruel wave. The other servers froze, some covering their mouths, others unable to stop their grins. A busboy stifled a laugh behind his hand. The corporate guests leaned back in their chairs, watching as though it were entertainment. One of them even clapped, muttering, "Now that's a show." Amelia stood still, her heart pounding, her fists clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. Flour trickled down her neck, onto her apron, onto the polished floor beneath her feet. The humiliation was absolute, raw, undeniable. The administrator dusted his hands theatrically, as if he had completed a task. "There," he said with mock satisfaction. "Now you look the part." The room erupted. Laughter spilled across tables. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable, but many watched with an eager, guilty fascination, as if cruelty itself were a spectacle worth savoring. For Amelia, time slowed. Each sound, each whisper, each laugh felt like a dagger. But beneath the burn of humiliation, beneath the sting of tears threatening to fall, something sharper surged. Resolve. She straightened slowly, flour still drifting from her hair in pale clouds. Her eyes locked on the administrator's smug face, and in that moment, she no longer saw him as a tormentor. She saw him as evidence of everything broken, everything corrupt, everything rotten in the heart of this place, The laughter echoed around her, but Amelia no longer heard it as defeat. She heard it as the final note of a song that was about to change. Because this moment of cruelty, this very public humiliation, was not the end. It was the beginning. The administrator smirked and turned away, basking in the laughter of the guests. But when his eyes flicked back to Amelia, expecting her to crumble, he froze for the briefest second. There was no defeat in her gaze, no shame, only calm, unshakable fire. And, though no one else realized it yet, though the laughter still rang through the chandelier-lit hall, the balance of power had just shifted. Amelia stayed silent, brushing a streak of flour from her cheek with deliberate grace. Her time to speak had not yet come. But when it did, every person in that room would remember this night forever. For a long moment, the restaurant remained suspended in cruel laughter and muffled whispers. The golden chandeliers sparkled above, their light catching the haze of flour that still floated in the air around Amelia like ghostly smoke. She stood in the center of it all, silent, still, her black skin and crisp uniform now coated in a white mask of humiliation. The administrator strutted back a step, his smirk plastered across his face as if he had just claimed victory in a private war. "Back to work, Pilar," he mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. "If you can still call that working." The words were meant to finish her, to make her shrink away into silence. But Amelia did not move. Instead, she reached up, untied the apron that clung heavy with flour, and folded it slowly in her hands. Each motion was deliberate, measured, filled with a quiet dignity that seemed to stretch the air taut. The laughter faltered. The room hushed. Even the guests, leaning back in their chairs, enjoying their fine wine and the spectacle, began to sense something shifting. Amelia lifted her head, her eyes sharp, her jaw set. She spoke clearly, her voice, ringing out like crystal struck in a silent hall. "Enough!" The single word cut through the room, slicing away the laughter. Conversations died. Forks paused midair. The administrator stiffened, his smirk twitching at the edges. Amelia took one step forward, then another, until she stood in the full glow of the chandelier. She pulled a folder from the pocket hidden beneath her vest, the one she had kept close since the day she signed the papers. Her hands, though dusted with flour, held it firmly. "My name," she said, her voice steady and unshaken, "is Amelia Johnson." The administrator blinked, his smirk collapsing into confusion. "I'm not Pilar. I am not here to serve under you. I am the new owner of this restaurant." Gasps rippled through the room. A wine glass slipped from a guest's hand and shattered against the floor. One of the waitresses covered her mouth with trembling fingers. The busboy froze, eyes wide. Even the corporate guests who had been laughing loudest now sat stunned, their smirks evaporating into disbelief. Amelia opened the folder and held up the documents. Official contracts stamped and signed, bearing her name and the name of the restaurant in bold. "As of 2 weeks ago, this establishment belongs to me." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. The administrator stammered, his voice breaking. This is some kind of joke." Amelia's eyes burned into his. "Do you see me laughing?" His face drained of color. He glanced at the other staff for support, but no one moved. They had all seen the paperwork, the authority in her stance, the steel in her words. "You came here every day," Amelia continued, her voice steady but rising with intensity, "mocking me, criticizing me, humiliating me, not because of mistakes I made, but because of the person you thought I was, a nobody, a worker beneath you, someone unworthy of respect. And tonight, you took it further than ever, in front of guests, in front of my staff." Her words echoed through the hall, heavy and unforgiving. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to meet her gaze. Others whispered, astonished at the turn of events. A few even nodded quietly, recognizing the truth in her voice. The administrator shook his head, his hands trembling. I didn't know." "That's the problem," Amelia interrupted, her voice cutting like a blade. "You never cared to know. You saw only what you wanted to see, and tonight the world sees you." The guests exchanged glances. The humiliation, once hers, now hung squarely over the administrator like a dark shadow. His power, so absolute just moments ago, had evaporated in the face of her truth. One of the waitresses spoke softly, almost in awe. "She really is the owner." The murmur spread quickly. Staff members bowed their heads, some ashamed, others too stunned to move. The busboy who had laughed earlier now stared at the floor, his cheeks burning red. Amelia closed the folder and tucked it under her arm. She brushed a streak of flour from her cheek with calm precision, then looked directly at the administrator. "You wanted an audience," she said. "Now you have one." Her words carried the weight of finality. In that chandelier-lit hall, surrounded by wealthy guests and staff frozen in disbelief, Amelia's revelation thundered louder than any insult, any laughter, any humiliation that had been thrown her way. The administrator swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Please, I didn't mean—" But his words trailed off into silence. No one would believe them now, not after what everyone had witnessed. Amelia turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the room. Guests, staff, and administrator alike felt the force of her presence. Not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as a leader, the true owner. And though she had not yet spoken her final judgment, the promise of it hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The silence that followed Amelia's revelation was heavier than any applause, heavier even than the laughter that had mocked her minutes before. The room, gilded and bright, had become a courtroom. Every gaze turned to her, waiting for what would come next. She could feel the weight of the guests' eyes, the shame of the staff, and the growing panic of the administrator whose arrogance had crumbled into fear. Amelia let the silence linger, refusing to rush. Power, she knew, lived in patience. She removed the last traces of flour from her shoulders with slow, deliberate strokes, then set the folded apron onto a nearby table like a discarded mask. She stood tall now, no longer hiding as Pilar, but fully herself, Amelia Johnson, the woman who had bought this place with her own strength and vision. The administrator finally broke the silence. His voice was thin, stripped of confidence. "Miss Johnson, I didn't know. Please, if you had known I was the owner, you would have treated me differently," Amelia interrupted sharply. Her words landed like iron. "That is precisely why you are unfit to be here. Respect is not conditional. Dignity is not reserved for a chosen few. And leadership built on humiliation is not leadership at all." His lips parted, searching for another excuse, but no words came. He stood frozen, his suit immaculate, his pride shattered. Amelia turned slightly, addressing not just him, but the entire room. "This restaurant is supposed to represent excellence, not only in its food but in its people. Yet, what I found here was arrogance, cruelty, and prejudice. Tonight has exposed everything I needed to see." The guests shifted in their seats. Some murmured agreement. Others kept quiet, too complicit in their own silence from moments before. Still, Amelia could feel their respect shifting, the balance of power tilting entirely in her favor. She looked back to the administrator. Her voice carried finality. "You are dismissed. Effective immediately." Gasps scattered across the staff. The administrator's face drained of all color. "Please, don't—" Amelia's eyes narrowed. "Security will escort you out." Two kitchen Steffi, stronger and more loyal than the administrator had ever realized, stepped forward instinctively. They didn't need her order repeated. The man who had strutted with authority only moments ago now stumbled backward, pleading quietly as they guided him toward the door. His voice broke, desperate, but Amelia didn't waver. She watched him go, her expression unflinching. When the doors closed behind him, she turned her gaze on the rest of the staff. The servers, the busboys, the hostesses, all of them stood rigid, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously. "Some of you laughed," Amelia said evenly. "Some of you joined in, some of you stood by in silence. All of you made a choice tonight." Her words cut through the air, not shouted but spoken with the authority of truth. "You will not all remain here. Those who took pleasure in cruelty, those who humiliated instead of helped, those who revealed their disdain openly, you will leave with him. Your time in this place is over." The silence deepened. A few faces fell immediately, guilt written clear across their features. Others looked down, ashamed, unable to meet her gaze. "And the rest of you," she continued, "have one chance. Only one. If you stay, you will rebuild this restaurant not on arrogance but on respect. Not on humiliation, but on dignity. If you cannot do that, you may leave now." For a moment, no one moved. The weight of her words pressed down like judgment itself. Then, slowly, one of the waiters stepped forward, the same who had smirked when she struggled with trays. His hands shook as he spoke. I'm sorry, Miss Johnson. I was wrong." Amelia studied him, her gaze sharp. "Your apology means nothing unless your actions change. Decide whether you can live up to what this place will become. Stay or go." The waiter bowed his head. "I'll stay, and I'll change." Others followed. Some apologized, some simply lowered their eyes and nodded, accepting her conditions. A handful quietly removed their aprons, placing them on the counter before walking out the back door in silence. They knew they had no place in the new order Amelia was building. When the decisions were made, Amelia addressed the remaining staff. "From this day forward, this restaurant will be known not only for its food but for its humanity. No guest will ever leave feeling unwelcome. No worker will ever be humiliated. If any of you cannot uphold that, you will not last here." Her words, steady and resolute, carved themselves into the room like a vow. Then she turned her gaze toward the guests, the very people who had watched her humiliation unfold. "And to our patrons," she said, her voice calm but unyielding, "you too must understand. Respect flows both ways. My staff are not your toys, not your jesters, not beneath you. They are the lifeblood of this place. If you treat them with anything less than dignity, you will not be welcome here." The boldness of her statement stunned the room. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but no one dared challenge her. A few even nodded, realizing the truth in her words. Finally, Amelia straightened her shoulders and allowed the silence to settle again. She no longer looked like a woman covered in flour. She looked like a leader reclaiming her kingdom. "Tonight marks the beginning of something new," she declared. "This restaurant will no longer be built on cruelty. It will be built on excellence, and excellence begins with respect." Applause broke out. It started with a single pair of hands, hesitant but strong, then spread until the sound filled the entire hall. Guests stood, clapping, nodding in approval. Staff members joined, some with tears in their eyes, as though grateful for the chance she had given them. Amelia stood at the center, unshaken, her presence commanding. She had been tested, humiliated, mocked, but in the end, she had revealed not only her true identity, but the truth of everyone around her. As the applause thundered, she turned toward the office at the back of the restaurant. She walked with calm authority, no longer hiding, no longer Pilar. The doors opened for her, and she entered not as a waitress but as the rightful owner. Behind her, the restaurant breathed differently now. The laughter of cruelty had been replaced with the applause of respect. The staff who remained would never forget this night. The guests who witnessed it would carry the story far beyond these walls. And Amelia Johnson, once humiliated under a shower of flour, had become the name that would define the restaurant's future, a symbol of dignity, justice, and strength. What do you think about this story? Leave a comment, subscribe for more, and don't forget to share this video.